Today is a special day, and I'm excited to thank you all for helping me reach 300 subscribers on my YouTube channel, as you've been keeping up with my content and supporting my YouTube channel, and I'm doing the best that I can. And cannot wait to talk about the history and engineering of the McLaren F1 hypercar. This possibly might surprise those of you who grew up with the McLaren F1 of the 1990s, because this legendary icon supercar just turned 30 years old this year and is still way ahead of its time, beautiful and so timeless as it gets. It's really hard to believe that the F1 is 30 years old and still peaks of adequate design compared to some present supercars today. So I had an idea to celebrate McLaren F1's 30th birthday by covering its entire documentary history as being the third McLaren to review on my channel. The first two McLarens I reviewed were the 12C and the GT. The links will be provided in the description down below if you've never watched them. But first, you're going to want to watch this video because I can promise that you'll love it as I take you down memory lane of what this car has become. This is still by far the most special McLaren ever to exist. The F1 is specifically defined as one of the greatest cars ever made, one of the all-time best cars, and the most excellent sports cars of all time among a wide variety of car enthusiasts and lovers. The McLaren F1 has earned its spot as the greatest car ever created and automotive success of all time. There have been numerous popular sports cars built by different car companies for years and years, but no sports car is as iconic as the McLaren F1 for several purposes in terms of design, features, and stunning legacy. However, there is much more that happened between the conceptualization and the production of the McLaren F1. The F1 was the fastest production car in the whole wide world for a decade, and this was McLaren's first ever production street car. Bruce McLaren himself had already been thinking about taking his racing technique to the road in the 1960s. He technically created a road car as a prototype by merging the M6B chassis with an M6 GT body and a Chevy engine, but it ended up shelved immediately when Bruce McLaren was killed in a crash in 1970. Since then, his name lives on in the company and later was bought by Ronald Dennis, a former mechanic that built race teams. He formed the McLaren Group, and then eventually McLaren Cars was founded in 1985, which is now known as McLaren Automotive today. Unlike the McLaren 12C and any McLaren that came after it was built by McLaren Automotive, whereas the legendary F1 was the only McLaren built by McLaren Cars. The McLaren F1 was a milestone piece of technology that took Formula One technology to the road. What led to this ultimate road car began with Gordon Murray, a famous South African British car designer of Formula One race cars and the McLaren F1. Ever since he was a teenager, he planned to design and build a mid-engine high-performance 3-seater sports car that is extremely light, very powerful, and non-compromising, driver-focused, and with driving pleasure. When Murray was waiting for a flight home from the 1988 Italian Grand Prix, he drew a sketched triple-seater sports car and proposed it to Ron Dennis, the founder of McLaren Group. He described the 3-seater car to be the ultimate road car of the 20th century. Gordon has enforced all that he has learned in designing a Formula One car into his concept car. The concept model's low weight was achieved by the use of lightweight materials like carbon fiber, gold, magnesium, Kevlar, and titanium. The McLaren F1 became one of the first production cars to have an F1-derived monocoque chassis made out of carbon fiber. With the help of designer Peter Stevens, the Ultima Mark III kit cars were used as test mules to test many elements and concepts before the first cars were built. The McLaren F1 was first revealed in May 1992 at the Sporting Club in Monaco, while it remained the XP1 original prototype that was tested. However, it was deemed illegal to be driven on a road, as it didn't have indicators and did not meet enough safety standards. So McLaren quickly resolved the issue and installed the missing parts, and built 5 prototypes, and only 2 were destroyed during the crash testing. McLaren built a total of 107 6 F1 units for the entire world, and this was a limited production hyper sports car that costs a multi-million fortune that millionaires and billionaires are willing to pay and drive it. It's also worth noting that under the hood is the glorious mid-mounted 6.1 liter naturally aspirated V12 sourced by BMW and uses gold foil as a heat shield in the exhaust compartment. The engine produces 627 brake horsepower at 7,400 RPM and 479 pound-feet of torque to the rear wheels combined with a 6-speed manual gearbox. An interesting fact is that the F1's engine almost didn't come from BMW. Gordon Murray and McLaren had a relationship with Honda, right? And he knew Honda, BMW, or Ferrari could construct an engine reliably. When developing the F1, they were benchmarking cars like Ferrari Testarossa and the Lamborghini Diablo. Chief designer Murray drove the Honda NSX, and when he did, that car made a huge impression on the McLaren group by having a great wide quality, handling, and balance, which was their target, without being overpowered and really fun to drive. Murray, being a fan of Honda engines, tried to convince Honda to build a V10 or V12 engine for his supercar, but Honda wasn't interested, even though McLaren had a relationship with Honda in F1. He then met up with his friend from BMW Motorsport, who took an interest, which led BMW to build him a new custom-built racing S70 V12 engine just for the McLaren F1. The BMW 850 CSI shares a somewhat similar engine, but everything here was custom built and a racing engine that McLaren ended up using for the F1 GTR, the GTR Longtail, and the Le Mans winning BMW V12 LMR prototype. This engine is just so special that many people consider it to be the best engine BMW has ever created, which is funny considering that it was never put into any BMW car in the first place. The McLaren F1 is more powerful and faster than most of the 1990s supercars in its day, like the Bugatti EB110, Ferrari F50, Jaguar XJ220, Lamborghini Diablo, etc. The F1 demolished every single supercar from that era and was the most ambitious and craziest supercar of its day, to be the driver's car. It also happened to become the fastest production car in the world in March 1998 and held the top speed record for 7 years at a mind-blowing 240.1 miles per hour or 386 kilometers an hour, achieving the bottleneck top speed and surpassing the Jaguar XJ220. It took just 7 freaking years until the 2005 Bugatti Veyron defeated the F1's speed record at a 253 mile per hour top speed. The F1's top speed record may be beaten by many cars in the past 20 years now, but remains the fastest naturally aspirated car of all time. And every car that has broken its record used forced induction. But wait, there are still more facts to cover about the McLaren F1. The car's design can be seen and described as very sleek and elegant with smooth lines and look impressive from every angle. There are some interesting quirks and features on the exterior, like the mirrors shared with the Volkswagen Corrado hatchback. The F1's taillights are shared with a bus. Yup, it's true. If you look very closely, the taillights are shared from the bus. The wheels have center locks with the F1 logo, which were used on race cars, and they were not that common back then on road cars, and Bramble brakes. The butterfly doors were inspired by a tiny Japanese compact car, the Toyota Sierra. The side windows are divided into 2 parts by that big line like the Subaru SBX to add strength so they won't shatter while the car's driving stupidly fast. There is a side luggage storage on the car that contains a large space on both sides of the car. It has air intakes on the roof and under each door to provide engine cooling and downforce. There is a small dynamic rear spoiler on the tail which will adjust to balance the center of gravity. The interior is well built, featuring leather upholstery, as well as a proper sound system with door mounted speakers and even air conditioning. It's got 3 seats, while the driver's seat is placed in the center ahead of the fuel tank and the engine bay. The F1 can carry 2 more passengers than just about any other supercar in existence. There is a manual stick shift, some buttons, and controls. The engine start sequence offers a sort of fighter jet feeling every time you fire up the engine. The F1 is a tiny car even if it doesn't seem like it in images of modern standards. It's about the same length as a modern Volkswagen Golf and the same width as a Toyota Camry. The F1 is super light and yet weighs the same as a Miata, around 2,500 pounds, making 627 brake horsepower that can do 240 miles per hour. Considering how special the F1 is, of course, it got a race car version. The mighty McLaren F1 GTR, which McLaren only built 28 of them to compete in the BPR Global GT Series and the infamous 24 Hours of Le Mans. The F1 GTR actually produced less power than a road car, at around 600 horses, and didn't affect the car negative in any way. 5 F1 GTRs entered the gateway at the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1995, outlasting the custom-built prototype race cars, and the black F1 GTR managed to take victory at Le Mans after racing in the rain, even though it was highly off the pace in qualifying. McLaren's Le Mans win was one of the most stunning in motorsports history and won several other races too. Not only did the F1 master on the roads, but also in the motorsports as well. McLaren built 5 McLaren F1 LM road cars to honor the 5 F1 GTRs that attended at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. The F1 LMs were painted in papaya orange in memory of Bruce McLaren. They even created 2 F1s and were upgraded to unrestricted F1 GTR specs, resulting in 680 brake horsepower and had an extra high downforce package. In 1997, the final incarnation of the road car was the McLaren F1 GT Longtail, which essentially was a homologated road car on which the GTR Longtail race car is based on. The race car Longtail is designed to compete in many world-class racing championships, such as Japanese Grand Touring Championship and the FIA GT Championship up against Porsche and Mercedes. The F1 GT features an extended rear body for increased downforce and reduced drag without the back wing. The front end had extra vents and wheel arches widened to fit larger wheels. The car retained the standard F1 chassis, retained its production numbers, retained the center driving position, and the same BMW V12 engine. The F1 GT is 44 pounds lighter than the standard F1. Only 3 units were produced, including the prototype, making this extremely rare. McLaren initially only needed to build 1 car and didn't have to sell it. However, demand from customers drove McLaren to build 2 production versions that were sold. After that point, the McLaren F1's production came to an end in 1998, where the legend set the world speed record to end its chronicle history. The McLaren F1 was like nothing anybody has seen before. It wasn't only designed to be the world's fastest production car, but the car was also designed to provide a certain sensation that all supercars should have. The inspiration for butterfly doors came from Toyota. The 3-seat layout was not just for looks, but to be more practical. The gold engine bay wasn't just for show, but was used as a heat shield when the engine gets seriously hot, especially going at 240 miles per hour. The F1 became the first production car to use a carbon fiber monocule chassis structure to be extremely lightweight, plus began the trend of swept dial needles in the gauge clusters. With a manual transmission, no driving aids like anti-lock braking system, no traction control, and stability control, which implies that the F1 is also dangerous to drive. Jay Leno, who owns the McLaren F1 for over 20 years now, describes it as the ultimate sports car of the 20th century and the last truly analog high-performance sports car. And a lot of enthusiasts declare it one of the greatest cars ever made in the super hypercar community, the finest sports car of its generation. Now, logically speaking, The McLaren F1 may not be the greatest, best-selling, most practical, reliable, or affordable automobile in the world that never drew the attention of the vast majority population of getting from point A to point B on a daily basis. But for many car guys, don't necessarily look for the most practical cars, the most reliable cars, or even the fastest cars, but the best experience that they can. And the McLaren F1 is a great example of those things. Yet, the McLaren F1 paved the way for the next successor, the P1, and now Gordon Murray Automotive built and resurrected a brand new driver-focused supercar inspired by the engineering principles of the McLaren F1, called the GMA T.50 or Type 50. Nonetheless, long live the McLaren F1 with the greatest BMW engine ever made. And now, that's a wrap for this video. So, I hope you guys really did sit back and relax and enjoy this epic video about this legendary McLaren F1. And if you did, do not forget to click like and subscribe for some more upcoming car videos. And like I say every video, you are more than happy to give me any car suggestions in the comments down below. Now enough talk. Time to listen to the epic sound of the BMW V12 engine from the McLaren F1. Peace out, stay safe, Chris the Radar, out.